She was bare. She was trembling, and she was inching across the scorching turf of the Nebraska plains with nothing but a ragged scrap of her bridal gown clutched to her bosom. The late summer sun hammered down relentlessly, and every bit of her flesh was coated in grit, welts, and crusted trails of crimson. Her breaths came in ragged, fractured heaves, like a creature that had fled too long. She kept inching forward. She wouldn't risk rising, and she wouldn't glance behind. Anna Reed was just 20, but her gaze held the weariness of someone who'd endured a dozen battles. She'd slipped away mere moments before first light, fled the cabin that had held her captive for 14 days, fled the brute who'd claimed to be her spouse, fled the blows that had battered her, the cords that had chafed her wrists raw, the root cellar where she'd been disciplined for every act of defiance. Her soles oozed with each drag, her limbs quivered from sheer fatigue. She had no flask, no garb, no bearings, just one fierce urge sustaining her. Flee. She made it to the foot of a towering elm that had rooted there for over a century along the Platte River Valley's fringe. Its dappled shadow was meager, but to her, it was divine. She huddled with knees drawn tight to her chest, the shredded bridle scrap quivering in her grip, her breath spiraling into frenzy. And right then, she caught the deliberate crunch of boots on the earth. Not her husband's tread, not the rustle of foragers. It was the deliberate, purposeful stride of a fellow on a mission. Herder Jacob Harlan emerged from the high weeds, 51 years weathered by blaze, gale, and sorrow. He'd outlasted the longhorn treks, the parched seasons, and the passing of his kin. Nothing rattled him now, or so he'd convinced himself, until he spotted her. He halted. His inhale snagged. The figure beneath the elm seemed hauled straight from the abyss, her limbs folded round her frame as if piecing her spirit back from shards. Her stare rose to meet his, laced with a dread that could make any soul feel vile just for being present. Jacob let his Stetson tumble. He advanced with care, tender, the way one nears a spooked mare. He settled his duster over her frame without a murmur. For an endless beat, Anna kept her eyes averted. Then her mouth quivered open, split and seeping at the edge. Her tone was a hush, scarcely more than a sigh, and still, it struck Jacob like a rifle slug to the ribs. 3 times daily, I'll stand as your bride. Jacob reeled, dazed, not by the plea itself, but the raw ache fueling it. A young woman trading her form for shelter. A soul convinced her worth lay solely in chains. And as the breeze veered across the flats, one query shimmered up like haze from the soil. If a lady utters such a plea to endure, what sort of horror is she fleeing? Jacob never laid a finger on her after that fractured, haunting phrase. He merely cinched his duster snugger and scooped her up, the way a gent might cradle a wounded doe spied by a hedgerow. She was feather light. That unnerved him deeper than the marks marring her hide. A frame so slight hadn't nourished itself in weeks, perhaps months. The trek back to his spread unfolded in stillness, the sort that weighs on the bones. Anna fixed her gaze earthward, as if each sprig of grass might sprout and condemn her. She pressed the bridle scrap to her bosom, even with Jacob's heavy wool duster already shielding her. It was like she distrusted any cover to linger, not even fabric. When they arrived at his homestead by the Platte River, she faltered at the threshold. Her words were a faint exhale. "Is there anyone else inside?" Jacob gave a slow shake of his head. "Not any longer." He offered no more. She pressed no further. The sorrow etched on his features spoke volumes. Inside he kindled a lantern, ladled her a mug of tepid water, and offered a simple frock from his departed wife's chest. It was unadorned, spotless, and comically oversized, but Anna seized it like a castaway grips flotsam. She pivoted away modestly, easing it over her form. As the cloth grazed her skin, she went rigid, bracing for a slap that never fell. No palm descended. She peered back, puzzled, wary almost. Jacob eased onto a bench at the trestle, granting her room. No rush. His timbre was deep, even, the manner of fellows past 50 who've weathered tempests enough to grasp at forbearance trumps bluster. After a drawn hush, Anna edged toward the lantern's glow. Her digits skimmed the mug's lip. Then, like a stray yarn tugged at last, the account unraveled. She shared of the nuptials 14 days past, of the affluent merchant in the hamlet old enough to sire her, of his pious grin in the steeple that twisted the instant their door latched. She recounted how he'd forced that vile vow from her lips each dawn, each midday, each dusk, 3 times daily. You will be my bride. It wasn't a vow, it was a decree, a torment, a ritual of dread masked as union. And Jacob hearkened, unyielding, uncondemning, just absorbing with that profound quiet that lets a lady sense that she might not be unhinged after all. When her words ebbed at last, she met his eyes on a quaking inhale. What'll he unleash when he learns I bolted? Jacob held her stare through a thick, leaden pause, and his reply wasn't the balm she craved, for the true peril was already cantering their way through the high grass, and neither grasped it yet. Jacob found no slumber that eve. He perched by the pane with the lantern dimmed, scanning the inky sweep of the plains like it might stir. A twinge in his marrow whispered foul. Elders like him heeded such whispers. The breeze hung too limp, the chirps too muted. Even the stream beyond hummed uneasy. Anna dozed up a narrow pallet by the hearth, coiled tight as a fern in his lost wife's patchwork. Now and then she'd jerk, the way maimed beasts do in visions of pursuit. Jacob yearned to grant her solace, but out here, ease is a whim. The flats ever nudge souls that peril race swift and unannounced. As dawn's tint edged the horizon, Jacob spied stir along the rail. 3 horsemen, cautious, creeping shades, loath to be spied. He leaned in, parting the drape of the pair of digits. He knew one mount. It was Victor Klein's. Jacob's jaw clenched. The grizzled traitor abroad at break of day. That spelled strife. Grave strife. The 3 reined up by the outbuilding. Victor bellowed first. His bark shattered the calm like bramble cracking parched rind. Jacob Harlan, fetch my bride forth. She's bound home this day. Anna rose with a sharp wheeze, fisting the patchwork till seam strained. She turned to Jacob, gaze split betwixt dread and remorse as if she'd wrecked his world by mere breath. Jacob raised a palm. Linger at my lank. He crossed the stoop. The morning already swelted, laced with loam. Victor seemed diminished from his townish stature, but fiercer too. His vesket rumpled, locks askew, cheeks flushed with iron and chagrin. Flanking him 2 tavern roughnecks, callous swords palms hovering near holsters. Victor swelled his breast. The code deems her mine. You're harboring a wedded lass. That's abduction, and I'll see you clapped in the Shire lockup our twilight. Jacob held his peace at first. Let the quiet hone sharp. Brutes like Victor loathed the void. It stripped their might. At length Jacob replied, She stirs not till I hear from her own lips she yearns to. Victor cackled. She's a bride. She claims no yearnings. That barb lanced Jacob fiercer than any cudgel, the sort of venom that seeps beneath flesh and festers. Anna framed the lintel, then her grasp faltered, but her timbre held firm. I'm done as your bride. Victor's hue deepened to scarlet. You've no say. But she did, and that marked the instant Jacob sensed this clash would spill red ere midday. Before we press on, take a languid pull from your brew, ease those taut shoulders, and drop in the remarks what hour it chimes where you're tuned in from. And if this tale's hooked you thus far, mull hitting follow. It bolsters more than you reckon. Set for the twist ahead? Jacob had wrangled raging steers, bone-dry spells, sweltering heats and gales that rent sheds asunder. But not in his 51 turns matched the blaze in Victor Klein's glare that dawn. The elder seemed primed to gnaw iron and hawk embers. His digits quaked, not from dread, but wrath, the breed that goads wise heads to folly. His pair of tavern louts looked grimmer. One popped his joints like he prayed Jacob would lash out prime. The other fondled his sidearm's grip as if it were a talisman. Such rabble don't saddle pre-dawn sands intent for mayhem, and Jacob divined it. He descended the veranda deliberate, heels grinding the brittle sward. Victor jabbed a digit his way, quivering with outrage. "You filched what's mine." Jacob drew air. "She answers to none but herself. Full stop." That riposte only swelled Victor's roar. "She's my bride. The writ declares it." And there lurked the snare word anew. Bride. A term meant for haven. Yet for Anna, it evoked welts, panic, and Eve's groveling for grace in a barred chamber. Anna edged just astern of Jacob, nigh enough to sip resolve from his unswayed stance, not so close as to graze. Her lilt wavered. "I'm through as your bride." Victor recoiled. He surged ahead like a hound loosed from leash. One lackey mirrored, delving his waistcoat. Jacob moved on pure reflex. Decades of range toil had honed him fleet with lariat and swifter with gut. He snatched the weathered rope from the rail, whirled it once, and the noose cinched Victor's shanks. The curd toppled fierce, snout plunging into soil. The draw hand bared a scant sliver of barrel ere Jacob's boot sent the iron flying. The other backed off, mitts aloft, grasping he'd pledged to a scrap beyond his grit. Victor sprawled wheezing, hawk and grit damning every oath in his lore. Jacob loomed nigh, tone hushed and level. "You'll never lay hand on her anew. Not this day, not any." Anna beheld it all from the veranda, dread and balm churning in her breast. For the first, someone had planted firm twixt her and the fiend who deemed her chattel. But a glint in Jacob's eyes chilled her. Not qualm of him, but qualm for the links he might yet tread. Victor glowered upward, lips curling in a warped smirk. "This ain't done. Harlan, mark me." Jacob marked him true. And therein dawned the truth. The sole closure lay in a deed irrevocable. For Victor Klein wouldn't quit these flats upright, and Jacob already fathomed it. Now the riddle lingers. When a decent soul breaches a bound, how deep does he plunge ere retreat's barred? Victor lingered prone a while. He gulped for wind, silt caking the damp on his jaws. Jacob saw plain now. No parley would quell this cur. No bailiff in the shire would bar him. No parson, no barrister, no kin. Such as Victor reckoned the globe their due and fealty. And when fealty frayed, they sought to shatter the one bold enough to stray. Jacob sensed a pivot within. Not fury, precisely. 'Twas the ironclad knowing that dawns when a gent spies but one trail ahead, and it reshapes all that trails behind. He collared Victor and hauled him toward the brook. The brace of lackeys wavered. One muttered a hex and clawed for his shooter anew. Jacob loosed a cautionary crack into the loam so near the spray flecked their spurs. The pair iced. The other hawked bile and hollered at Victor to up their wage if he craved their graves for his sake. Victor yowled he packed no coin. That sufficed. They traded a glance, shed their spine in the dust, and spurred for their ponies. Anna gripped the balustrade with both fists on the stoop, lips a-quiver. She voiced no halt to Jacob, no plea to pardon his groom. She merely observed, as if privy this juncture dwarfed them both, a hinge that would sway her days unbound. By the brook, the dawn blaze danced on the flow like crystal. Jacob tarried, ganting Victor a gander at his mien. Ganting him ken. He'll not maim her afresh. Victor mustered a glob of bile for a hex, but fright splintered his snarl. He knew. Jacob knew. Even the gusts over the flats knew. Beats on. The brook hushed once more. No tussle, no yowl, just the gentle hush of current easing home. Jacob eyed his palms, and they shuddered so fierce he scarce could knot them. His gusts rasped jagged, the rhythm of a gent post a threshold uncrossable backward. He scoured Victor from his spurs with brook rinse, but the remorse gripped tighter than mire. He'd claimed a breath, and its heft crushed his breast like a grindstone. He knew the bailiff would string him if tongues wagged.
He knew he'd bartered his still days for a specter he might never outpace. He gazed ranchward in grasp he couldn't root here eternal. Not post this, not with a duo of lackeys yet breathing somewhere over the flats. Tongues would wag. They ever do. He'd torch the scrolls on his escritor, stash the gear flecked with Victor's ichor, and stand primed to bolt with Anna ere the code came prying. Jacob lingered long by the flow, letting the quiet seep marrow deep. He didn't take pride in his deed, yet nursed no rue either. Some forks etch a gent eternal, but they safeguard what demands warding. As he trudged cabinward, Anna framed the portal. She queried not the deed, no need. She laid her palm to his breast, firm, kindling, thank you. A pair of syllables, yet they bore the load of every welt weathered and every dread outlasted. Days on the flats shifted thence. The inaugural fortnights proved thorny. Anna scarce slept unbroken. Each cabin bolt bolted her upright, a quake. She braced walls amid thunderheads and started at Jacob's soft footfalls in a chamber. He took to dozing on the veranda so she might claim repose unmenaced. Mending crept not swift for her, but it crept in modest strides. Certain morns she'd breathe a gentle grace. Certain noons she'd venture to the trestle over the nook. Only after sundry sunrises did her frame ease a touch, as if flesh recalled haven's texture. One midday Jacob set his weathered six-shooter on the board and deemed it meet she master it. Her grasp quivered lifting it, but she clung fast. They passed an hour astern the shed, Jacob steadying her hold, schooling her stance, her breath, her pull. As the prime round rent the ether, she winced, but wept not. The next nicked the rail. The third bloomed with a faint, valiant curve. For the first since her troth day, Anna tasted might anew. Jacob stirred each dawn with a spark unlit since youth. Aim. And kin and Kearney murmured of the lass who had fled and the gent who'd barred the shade pursuing her. Some brand him fiend, some champion. But verity rang plainer. At times a soul morphs to the mold required, to spare but one breath. But leagues athwart the flats, one lackey gained Kearney by gloaming. He strode bold to the bailiff's den with a yarn steeped in qualm and half-fibs, and the bailiff who'd never warmed to Jacob Harlan eased back in his seat and vowed he'd saddle soon for questions. Strife lingered not quelled. It merely donned fresh guise. So here's your musing. Had you graced that flat? Would you have stridden forth? Would you deem Jacob redeemer or rogue? And as Anna, would you bide by a gent who'd breached for your sake? And ere you stray, if this yarn stirred you or nudged deeper rumination, tap heart and follow. It strengthens more than reckon. And whilst here, mull a steaming draught, unwind, and share in the notes what chime marks your spot.